What's up, Instagram? Figured I'd bring you in for this little chat, try something new. So this is going to be like a 30-minute or so Q&A. I've got a bunch of really cool member questions that were posted over the course of this week. Sat down with them for about a half hour just now and tried to make a trend out of them because a lot of you guys are asking the same stuff and they're good questions. But if I can group them and show you that there's patterns and then try to bring a little bit of clarity into how you're telling yourself a story that's causing you to continue your process of not having an answer or not feeling like you're where you want to be yet, then hopefully I can provide a solid dose of value. If you've been following the Instagram stuff over the last week, I'm focusing so much more on just like a 1-minute clip where some sort of 30-minute lecture can get distilled down into like a 1-minute idea, where it's this really hard punch and it's direct and it's in some ways it's intense because hopefully the pain point that I'm hitting in you is real. But more or less that's my goal, is like I'm trying to affect some real strong questions in you to get asked, because one thing you'll notice about the type of quality of the questions that I'm about to answer are that they're really close to home. Like they're very humble and honest. And there's a lot of struggle like embedded in them. And I think it's just so relatable to the entire community, but there's few guys that are actually even talking about it. Like if as many guys were winning as everybody thought, there would be no poker. Like there's so many guys who are in that 95% zone of either break even or losing at any given one time. So let's get right into it. The first 3 questions that I saw come into this feed were surrounding entitlement and tilt. So a couple of them I just sort of paraphrased. I'll read them aloud real quick. I consistently get it in good, and losing is killing my motivation to keep grinding. This other guy says, I never trust that my opponent has something and end up calling way too much on the river. Good story, bro. More or less, what I see here is the entitlement comes from you believing for some reason that you deserve to win this pot or win over this short-term sample size. The problem with that is that it's not the reality that you're in as a poker player. Variance is a specific model to this game, and if you can't accept that, you're going to find yourself having all of this entitled dialogue like, why isn't it happening yet for me? Why am I not winning yet? I deserve more. And really fundamentally, like that's not even true. Not on a level of like you don't deserve to win, but you do not deserve to win over small samples. You do not deserve a guaranteed win. So most of the difference between someone who has their mental game pretty stable and someone who's sort of jumping off the rails is they have a fundamental misunderstanding of this concept of variance. They either haven't fully accepted it yet or they don't even really understand it yet. One of the things I always try to do to shed light on this is I'll show somebody the Poker Dope variance simulators. You can Google it. There's a program out that'll show you exactly what you should expect, and it'll plot standard deviations for how often you'll have a losing sample over X amount of hands if your win rate is whatever you want to plug in. So you can gain sort of a scientific awareness over it in that way, but once you have that, there's still this mental component that needs to get sorted out. And if you're not surrendered more or less to the fact that you do need to put in a certain amount of sample with a certain win rate, you're going to create these entitlement issues for yourself. Really, guys, if you play well over a large sample, you're going to win. Like, that's proven. And if you can't accept that, then you're not going to be able to do what it takes to actually achieve that sample. That should be your real goal, is like, how do I wake up every morning with the clarity to realize that if I just keep stepping toward a consistent long-term sample with solid play, I'm going to win. All of the bouncing around that happens in between is caused from some sort of sense of urgency. So I said this on Instagram the other day when I did a 1-minute post. You'll see it come up sometime this week. We're just getting like subtitles set up for it because It's cooler. Basically, the bulk of your entitlement is caused by some sort of urgency. And I'll get into more of this when I start to talk about like the truth of the storytelling that goes on behind the urgent mindset of like, I gotta win now, I gotta pay rent, I gotta move up stakes, I gotta impress someone. The big problem with urgency is that usually it manifests in you playing outside of your bankroll. So I said this on Instagram, the practical hack for getting out of an entitlement mindset is to actually force yourself to drop limits. Because so much of what guys are experiencing when they get this internal dialogue of like, gotta win now, gotta get more money, is on a deeper level, I don't have enough money to feel fundamentally safe. And that's coming because you're starting from a place of urgency, chasing it by moving up in stakes, and then probably getting knocked down, and now your bankroll is even less, and now you really are in a financial stress situation. So it's this awful loop where you end up self-sabotaging more or less, and you could say it's more or less a self-fulfilling prophecy, that the guy who feels like he needs to make money quickly often becomes the guy who starts telling himself he deserves to win more because he's now stressed out financially. Whereas someone who just goes more the slow and steady route doesn't end up triggering all those emotions that have them all desperate and shit. So big upgrade there if you're just looking for like the practical hack. And I mean, it is a mindset thing too, because by controlling your circumstance and limiting your bankroll, like making more of a conservative bankroll attempt, you're actually, I say, mitigating your tilt. You're controlling the possibility, you're lowering the possibility that you're going to end up going on some sort of downward spiral mentally, where you start chasing shit, rationalize for sitting higher stakes than you should, then lose 5 buy-ins and it's actually more like 10 buy-ins because you were supposed to be playing the limit down. This kind of thing happens quick, and then like once you're stuck, the rationalization keeps going, and it's like, oh, just one more shot, and then before you know it, you blow your whole roll, or something close to it, and now you've got real stress. So the moral of this story is most of you are not as broke as you think. You have the time to play at a limit that is comfortable for you. So work with that. The mindset takeaway would be, in some way, shape, or form, you've got to realize that entitlement and a sense of urgency is actually distorting how you perceive reality. Like, on a fundamental level, the way that you think reality is working is not true because your urgency is causing you to see things that are fake. You're trying to create opportunity where it's not there. That's one big one I see. Guys that feel entitled always want to believe that the opponent doesn't have something because they believe the opportunity should exist right now. That's a huge problem, actually. It can happen the other way too, where the urgency causes risk aversion. But I don't think that's the case in the comment from this guy who asked the question. Both of these guys say it's either killing my motivation because I'm getting it in good and losing, or I'm calling way too much on the river because I just never believe that the guy has something. There was 2 of that second one. Here's a really interesting one along the same lines. I don't feel motivated to play as much online because my ROI isn't as high as I think it should be because I'm on a 50-50 stake. So basically this guy doesn't want to sit down and play hands because 50% of his winnings go to his backer. First and foremost, take ownership over the fact that at some point in your life you decided this stake was what you wanted to go in on. Like, this was your best option, I hope, which is why you took it. So take ownership over the fact that like you're in this situation because it's probably rational for you to be staked. So if you're going to come over the top of that and now say, but I shouldn't have to give this guy 50% of my winnings. I should just be able to take all my winnings. Well, that's hugely entitled and rather foolish, because not only are you just like straight up contradicting yourself, but why do you deserve 100% of your winnings? Like, if you were so good prior to taking the stake that you didn't need the stake, then you should deserve 100% of your winnings. But you clearly did something so fundamentally wrong with either your bankroll management or your application of your skill set that now you're in a position where you can't fundamentally support yourself and you need a stake. So this whole backtracking of like, yeah, but I shouldn't have to give this money away, like, that's bullshit, dude. And I only say it from I say it from the most loving place, because I want you to actually start putting in the volume that's going to get you off the stake. Like, you're here now. What's the fastest way to get through the stake? Play the hands and make the money, clear the profit goal, and then take your share, and then you have 100% of yourself again. But again, it's this urgency of, I should be at the end of the road that I chose for myself. I should be at the end of this project where I'm on this stake and towards this profit goal. It's like, no, you're not there. You're here, and your insistence or addiction in trying to arrive there is causing you from making good decisions here. So it's a really frustrating form of self-sabotage to be dealing with, and I get that. But you really won't come out of it until you start losing interest in telling yourself that story. That's sort of the thing I'm going to connect through all these questions, is like, if you haven't lost fundamental interest in telling the type of story that you're telling yourself that's perpetuating your problem, then you're going to keep having the same problem. Like, you literally have to lose interest in telling yourself the story that I should be off this stake, I should be playing for myself. And the only way you're going to lose interest in it is if you no longer perceive benefit in it. So, as you guys know, I'm all about ownership, but more and more lately I'm trying to balance that with more of a mindset that ownership only takes you so far until you're willing to look at the belief that you're holding that is just not helping you, and then surrender out of that belief. So it's this weird balance of like owning your situation up to the point where you have landed in this situation, and then surrendering the beliefs that got you there. I feel like the combination of those two is pretty paradoxical, but it's what accelerates real change. This guy's question was one that I love. It was pretty long. I took the last 25% of it or so. Oh, man, this is so good. Okay, so this guy's struggling with, at first, he's saying stuff like, how do you know who to listen to with regard to poker strategy when everybody's doing different shit? Like, this guy raises with nut flush draws, but this guy doesn't. This guy uses this c-bet sizing, this guy doesn't. Who's right and who's wrong? He goes on to say, are they both right? Are they both wrong? He uses a specific example of like these mixed strategy zones. So I would start by saying, you're going to confuse yourself by looking at these spots because they're truly mixed strategy zones. Like, these are not the types of zones that need your attention for whether or not you're going to make or break yourself as a professional poker player. There are very large pot zones that need your attention first and foremost before you even start looking at smaller shit like mixed strategy, small pot play. Without fail, when I do a database review of a student, you see largest EV mistakes correlate to largest pots, unless he's very, very good. So start with getting more relevant with where you're looking for strategy. Stop focusing on these mixed strategy zones because they're supposed to be similar in EV. So like that type of strategy development, it's okay for that to be more preferential. It's okay for this guy to do this mixed strategy more often than mixed strategy because, practically speaking, from a win rate perspective, when you insert that into the real pools and environments and you get away from this GTO mindset, they're going to perform very similar. It's the large pot zones where there's clearly only one answer based on the pool trend or the specific player profile read that really needs your attention. So get over that. First of all, you're too micro in that sense, looking at types of pots that aren't actually worth much win rate. So he goes on to say, you made the decision at some point, talking about my experience, to take the step in a new direction and figure shit out for yourself, which I can't even begin to tell you how admirable that is to me. Thanks, bro. But how did you find the light to get out of that pitch black box I was referring to earlier? Where did you start and how did you start? And how did you determine what was right or wrong for yourself as you developed your own strategy? This question gets even better, but I'll stop here because it's relevant. So I've talked about this a lot. What happened to me around end of 2015. This was when Bovada was kind of becoming Ignition at the time. So like, picture that era. Games were blowing up. 1020 was really soft. I randomly started out at 510. For some reason, I just jumped on the site. I was living in Vegas at the time. And it was around the point where I was at a substantial burnout in my career. Like, over applying theory, not getting the results I want, continuing to insist that I just needed a larger sample before it proved it. So where I actually started was from a place of just total mental exhaustion. That would be the most macro starting point I could identify as. I spoke about this on the stream last week where somebody asked me, like, what's the skill set there for being able to actually start changing? And I said, maybe it's just being able to look at reality and being slightly more sensitive than most people, maybe, by saying, something's fucked up here. I can feel it, I can see it, something has to change, and it's probably me. So there's like that level of humility where, like, once you realize that reality is very fucked up, you can make the decision of being like, okay, so it's probably something I have control over in some way, shape, or form. So it started there with a mindset shift. And being on Bovada, it was the first time I really had access to exposed hole cards. Having not getting the results that I had been wanting to get, I started to look at the exposed cards at the end of every session, and I started to see a lot of trends. Specifically, I was folding a lot to guys that were putting me all in, and they were showing bluffs in the replayer. So naturally, over a sample of, like, it was substantial. It was like maybe I looked at like 10,000 hands, and I was like really alarmed at how much money I was getting bluffed off of in large pots. And I said, wow, these pools must have a higher percentage of major fish than I previously thought. So my initial adjustment was to just start calling more in large pots when people put me all in. Like, it was literally that simple. And it started to work. So maybe I got lucky in the sense that I ran well in that initial period, or maybe I would have lost confidence. But to simplify, I started with the vision that I had, and I was lucky to have this format of Ignition where hole cards were exposed. But I had something, and I knew that I had something that other people were saying was just unfair. Like, most people would say, this is so unfair that Ignition is showing hole cards, like, we shouldn't have to deal with this. I was more concerned with, like, if we have this vision, I'd rather not complain about it. I'd rather get more value out of it than anybody else is getting. So I start simple, I start with where I have vision, and I start to scale my vision in the direction that feels true. And in order to do that, you have to have a balance of scientificness to your exploration and also intuition. Now, giving people intuitive privilege is usually the caveat, because what most guys do is they over-apply intuition, thinking that they have better skill set at reading short-term samples, trends over short-term samples, without actually balancing it with scientific data. So mass data analysis, the night vision pack, this was the progression of balancing science with intuition. And so it just started to scale. Like, I kept over beyond a reasonable doubt, and where's the next frontier where I want to get more vision, and what's my intuition telling me? Some sort of combination of that pattern. Some sort of combination of the pattern of and what I didn't know allowed me to continue to step in the direction of what I felt was relevant. Just going to pause for 1 sec, see if Instagram... Instagram's kicked back in, but my Facebook seems to be hiccuping. There's another video specifically that I'm going to post for this guy. There's a video I did in 2017 back on the Twitch streams, and it's so cool for exposing, like, where you're being overly insistent with your own strategy development. While I wait for Facebook, chill with Instagram for a second. What's up, guys? How can I help you? What are you struggling with? What are you not seeing clearly? Where is your confusion? Hi, Berkey. Here's a cool question in the meantime. What typically holds more value for a poker player? General meditation or visualization type meditation focused on poker and dealing with swings? Cool question. I'm not really too into this visualization shit for meditation. I think a lot of times it's compensating for something deeper that probably needs to be addressed. Like, yeah, there's a place for like dosing your mind with opportunistic thinking, but ultimately, like, why do I need meditative realization when I can just focus on cleaning up my sense of like where my reality is fucked up? Like, instead of visualizing meditation in like some sort of fantasy zone, why not get to the bottom of like, where is my reality off in how I'm seeing things? And this is a lot what I was talking about when I said I started to change my strategy up on Ignition, was just getting to the bottom of what was going on different in reality than what I thought it was. Might actually have to shift completely over to Instagram for this. Or maybe I'll just start a new stream on the old book. It's frustrating that in 2018, in the United States of America, I can't hold a solid internet connection for over 30 minutes. Alright, I'm just starting this up. So, back to what I was saying about this guy's question. Over insistence in strategy development. Facebook, what's up? I'm not sure if this is showing up in my event, but it'll be on my page, and somehow I'll snip them together. So I just talked about what my experience was with how I started piecing together strategy development, like from the ground up, because I literally did a 180. Like, guys who used to know me, like if you first came into my Run At Once videos, I was like the theory guy. And all my content revolved around just like, how do we develop more sound theoretical approach to the game, and then especially even making the mistake of saying, how do we try to implement these theoretical approaches into the game? That was the cause of me hitting burnout. Was like you can literally see old Run At Once videos where I'm trying to use a random number generator on screen as if I even know, as if I have any fucking clue what the right frequency should have been for how often I'm supposed to bet and check this hand in this exact spot. Like, it was hugely, hugely irrelevant. And funny to look back on it. And maybe at the time it was like cool and interesting because like that's what the community was asking for. And maybe it was even relevant for us to see and explore how futile that path actually was. But eventually, because I was like the innovator of that type of shit at the time, more so than anybody in my circle at least, I was the first one to hit burnout with it. So I was naturally the first one to come to a crossroads where if I was going to change, I probably had to do something radically different. Like, I was so far off in the wrong fucking direction that I really needed to do something almost 180, completely different if I was going to change. So now's where the question gets really fun. This guy continues to say that he's really interested in developing his own strategy. And he wants to know specifically how I can help him do that. So here's what I would say, and it's probably not the answer that you want. And the reason I know that is because you're asking this question. But I really feel like if what you want deep down, without deluding yourself, because I think that's what you're doing. If what you really want is to actually get successful and balance the way that you see the game and balance the reality from which you see, you got to hear this, and you got to just not take it personal, because it's a very personal thing. Just from listening to your message, what I'm getting very clearly from you is this. It's 2018, and you're still more interested in starting from the ground up to make your own strategy than looking around and picking something that's standard and okay and building from there. Reading what you were saying about, like, what's the right bet size here, like, you are very micro at the foundation of this. You are looking very, very micro at reconstructing a blueprint strategy from the start. You would be better off going to any training site or any free YouTube content and picking one coach with one specific strategy, following him for a certain amount of time, integrating it, applying that while focusing on all the more relevant spots like your large pot zones and your overall mindset and emotional state. You would be better off picking anything than doing what you're doing. Because the fact is, bro, it's 2018 and there is actually a lot of solid content out there. Like, you could literally do a Google search, and the 5 that pop up would probably help you 100 to 500% more than the progress you're making on a daily basis by trying to do this all on your own. So here's the fundamental belief system that I think you're stuck with. And until you address this, you're probably not going to be able to make progress. I did this. You can go check out my fucking free YouTube content. That's what it's there for. It's there exactly for guys like you who are totally lost and feel like they gotta fucking reinvent the wheel, when actually all you have to do is accept the fact that someone already did it. Like, we could sit here all day and talk about how I decided that I was going to fucking crawl out of bed post-burnout and create some sort of intuitive, independent learning methodology. Sure, if you really want to know that story, I'll fucking tell it to you all day. But what this is really about is, like, it's done. It's been done in this profession. There's not just one of me, there's probably a handful of me that all did this, and now it's public. And in a lot of ways, it's free. So rather than sit here and talk about how I can help you identify what types of bolts and fucking screws you need to start building your foundation, I would rather just direct you towards a foundation that's already stable, give you something to work with, and watch you scale your vision intuitively from there, because you're overwhelmed from believing deeply that you need to do this yourself. So here's the really painful part. It's probably going on at a very subconscious level, and somebody's got to tell you, and I love you enough to tell you. Friends probably won't tell you this because they enjoy your conversation in their Skype group, or they enjoy you validating the same opinions that you guys have somehow deluded yourselves into coming up with together. It is very likely that you care more about doing it your own way than actually having success. Talked about this on the Elliott Rowe podcast. In fact, it was the taboo topic that when me and Elliott sat down and mapped everything out, like, he specifically didn't want to go there with it. And there's a reason. It's because it's probably the most triggering thing that you could tell an audience is if a large percentage of you likely want it to be on your own terms more than you want actual success. Meaning, if you don't get success in the way you think it needs to look, it's not worth anything to you. It's not worth enough to you. So what does this look like? Like, what is the actual internal dialogue here that's going on, and, like, why is this happening? To the best of my understanding, it goes something like this. You have a fundamental sense of unworthiness, and this connects, like, very much to these 2 last questions that I marked. These guys saying an underlying energy of self-doubt polluting my decisions. My state of mind is fucked. I'm stuck in poker. I don't trust myself. All the same shit. You're starting from a fundamental place of unworthiness. And in your mind, you believe that the way to fix this is to solve some sort of puzzle. So notice the inclination, or you could even say notice the addiction of starting from a place of feeling like you're not enough, or that you can't trust yourself, that you got to fix this. Starting from a place of believing your strategy sucks and needing to get somewhere down the road where you believe it's going to get fixed. This is the core mistake, because actually what you're starting from is nothing but a belief system, and that belief system is actually quite false. Fundamentally, you are already worthy, regardless of whether or not you figure out the right fucking poker strategy. But it's feeling unworthy that causes you to believe that finding the right poker strategy is going to make you worthy. So this gets very meta, but try to stay with me. It's really quite simple. Your addiction to trying to solve puzzles is causing you to continue to reinforce that you're not worthy until you solve the puzzle. But deep down, you never actually want to solve that puzzle because you're so interested in fighting for your own worthiness. It's extremely fucked up. I get it, that it's a huge mindfuck, but this is what's going on in probably 90% of poker players to some degree, and it's something that's persistent. Like, you don't just like conquer this. You just become more aware of when this type of dialogue asserts itself. And I would say, like, that's what awareness is. It's like, it's being more vigilant with noticing when you start to rabbit hole in this type of direction and being able to spin yourself out of it fast enough. So, one more time. Something about your addiction to overcoming unworthiness by fixing life and solving the puzzle is actually keeping you stuck in a maze that continues to make the puzzle more complicated. I gotta do it myself. I gotta create this whole strategy myself. No, you don't, bro. Like, go pick anything that's already been constructed by people who were in this shit a few years before you. You don't have to do it yourself. That's the story you tell yourself to keep yourself on the lead of fighting for your own worthiness. This goes back to storytelling at its finest. How are you going to come back to your senses and see reality the way that it is? Well, first you got to stop telling yourself the story of how you think you need to reclaim your worthiness. Whether it's by developing your own strategy or getting to high stakes. All this shit is coming from the fundamental fucked paradigm of feeling like I've got to get out of feeling some sort of fundamental sense of lack, some sort of unworthiness. And you can really start to make big mindset strides if you gain awareness over this, because the next thing that happens, if you actually have this moment for yourself, where you're like, holy shit, that's me. To some extent, I'm doing that. To some extent, I'm deluding myself every day by overcomplicating the ride, because for some reason I want to solve this super complex puzzle because I think that'll be the thing. Reality is quite simple. If you're looking at it directly, and if you can step relevantly, you want to know how I did what I did. I just started doing that. I just said, where's the vision? How can I get more vision? And then how can I combine it into a consistent methodology that doesn't contradict itself? There's nothing more painful than waking up years into a story and realizing how fucking futile and how little hope there was the whole time by playing that story out. But there's nothing more painful than realizing that the thing that you've been doing for years actually didn't contain the solution that you thought was at the end of the road of that path. Now, there's also nothing more liberating than actually recognizing that and having the humility to drop out of it. But whether or not someone is available, I said this yesterday to one of my exec team members. I said, look, man, because mainly what I do lately is I literally go to the lake near my house and I just sit and I think about how am I going to take this one concept and distill it into 1 minute, how am I going to bring value to people who are either at the World Series or playing online, like really trying to combine the community and saying what is the biggest dose of value I could give in 1 minute today? And sometimes I think of cool shit, But sometimes I find myself walking home sort of in a strange space, and yesterday was one of these days where like I had a few cool ideas, but the type of understandings that really break someone out of their shell, sometimes they're quite meta. And the biggest difficulty for me is how to simplify that down to something that, not someone who's simpler, because that's a super arrogant thing to say, but like someone whose paradigm is not as able to juggle concepts, like multiple concepts, sometimes even seeming contradictory concepts. Talk about something like a paradox, and suddenly you get flamed on social for using like a word that you looked up in a thesaurus. Well, for me, paradox is part of my normal vocabulary. So part of my struggle is like, how the fuck do I explain to someone what a paradoxical understanding is if they've never approached this or even thought about it, or if they don't even know what that word means? Because the balances are real at a high level. So I walk in my door on this strange walk home where I'm feeling a little bit confused as to how I'm going to get these thought processes across in a way that's clear. And I told my brother, I really think this comes down to something simple, that like there are certain things that everyone needs to hear. Like maybe there's 10 things that I could say for the rest of my poker coaching career that would have the most impact, and I would never have to say anything different than those 10 things. 10 ideas, like 10 major themes. The problem being that even if I were able to articulate that in the perfect way, for each person who watches my content, there is still this X factor of, is the person emotionally available to actually process this? And I'm starting to realize more and more that like that is the real puzzle piece to being someone who puts out content, is like you're constantly trying to make the content as relatable and digestible to a wide group of people. But in the back of your mind, you've got to surrender all control over whether or not you get through the idea that you're trying to get through. Because ultimately, I think this is the key point, even if I were able to express these ideas perfectly, only a handful of you would actually be ready to do something with them. To digest them in a way where you're like, that shit's true, and even more importantly, I got to implement that like today. Focus my attention through those lines of perspectives, because I can't go back to thinking the other way. Not with this increased awareness. So that would be my closing plight, is the level. But we're getting solid enough technically as an industry. Like we're plowing into the gray area of the industry enough, like way more than even 5 years ago, where I really don't believe that there's so much to fear around like lightning sharp free technical content being put out there. I don't even think there's that much to fear about really stellar mindset content being put out there, because the major assumption that no one is challenging is that people who hear this information are actually at a place where they're available to process it. I like it. I like where we're at. I really appreciate you guys being so honest with these questions, because like it's much more fun to have a real discussion about something that's so clearly hitting you close to home. I hope I've done a little bit of good here in terms of providing a perspective that gives you something to latch onto. And even if it doesn't make perfect sense, go to the park and close your eyes and think about it for even 30 minutes. And I hope something sparks in you that's like, holy shit, that thing he said about the unworthiness trap is true. Or I don't need to create my own strategy. I can just pick someone else's up and run from there. Something that you can take from today that resonates with you where you are in your path. And I guarantee if you sit with it eyes closed for 30 minutes, you will open your eyes after that period of time and say, I know how to step more relevantly, not just today, but probably for the next week, month. And by staying consistent with that, you'll be able to wake up a month or two from now, look at the progress that you've had, analyze your environment, make objective calls as to whether or not it's time to shift. Do I have enough feedback to shift? What's my intuition telling me? Is there enough scientific evidence to support my intuition. That's something I'd love to talk more about. I think it's the major problem with strategy development once you get off the ground with it. So that would be sort of the next level conversation. It's like, all right, so you went and found some free content and you applied that strategy for a certain amount of time, like let's say 1 to 2 months. Now where do you go from there in terms of dissecting what needs to change? How do you analyze your environment objectively in order to make an adjustment that's like rational, so that you're not just flying by the seat of your pants and saying, well, it feels like people are doing this at the table, so I'm going to just start doing this. And then before you know it, every session becomes this weird rationalization of implementing some super over-intuitive strategy that you just feel like experimenting with that day. You don't want to get in that hole. That's a fucked up trap. So if you guys are interested in that, like, we can totally, maybe that's like maybe what the next event looks like. Second level strategy development. I mean, you could probably continue to stack levels on top, 3, 4, 5. What does it look like at a really high level of methodology? I put an Instagram post out. It's in review right now or something. It'll be up in the week. But the theme of it is, at a very high level, methodology is nothing but exceptions to rules stacked on top of each other. Where nothing contradicts, there's just like specific subtle things that change that create exceptions. So your whole web ends up just becoming like these really subtle exceptions to rules, and I think that's how it always will be. Thanks, Derek. I see you, and I'll get to that at a later Q&A. I like that concept a lot. I think it's pretty misunderstood. He's asking about Redline, but we'll save it for another day. Appreciate you guys as usual. I'm going to start doing more of these events, and I'm actually thinking about doing some sort of podcast thing with just members of the community. I want to try to make some sort of new format work, because I think the concepts that you guys want to talk about, like in terms of the realness of this specific community, because you guys are very humble and open with your emotions, I believe we should be able to make a podcast work that is just member only. So I want to call it something like Storytellers, where it's very similar to this but even more personal. So instead of you guys just submitting questions on Facebook, I'm thinking like I'll pick 10 or 12 of you and do 12 episodes where each one of you can come on the show and just talk about your story and where you're at with it, what you're struggling with, and I'll try to help that story along in any way that I can, by exposing where I think you're being assumptive and where your limiting beliefs are. Thanks, Tim. I see you, bro. Love you guys. Mad love to anybody who takes the journey this seriously and also this playfully, because I think it is a balance. Thanks, Adam. Peace to all my night vision bros. Cool stuff coming up toward the end of this month. Don't sleep on my Instagram or my Facebook. I'll be releasing all of the announcements there. Thank you, guys. Bye, Instagram. Thank you.